The Light Beyond the RiverA, a spiritual motivational story about faith, surrender, and divine timing. The silence before dawn. The village of Mira slept under the silver hush of a fading moon. The air smelled of rain and wet earth. In a small hut on the edge of the river, an old man named Eli sat awake, staring at the last flicker of his lamp. He had been a fisherman all his life. His hands were calloused from the years, his back bent by the weight of nets that often came up empty. But it was not hunger or age that kept him awake tonight, it was despair. For months, the river had been unkind. The currents had shifted, the fish had vanished, and Eli had begun to believe that heaven itself had turned its face away. He whispered into the darkness, "Why, Lord, have you forgotten me?" But only the sound of the river replied, soft, endless, and unknowable. Eli closed his eyes. He remembered his wife, Liora, who had passed away 3 winters ago. She had always said, "When faith is easy, it is not faith. It becomes faith only when the night is long, and the answer does not come." He wanted to believe her words still mattered, but tonight, they felt like echoes from a world that no longer existed. The stranger by the river. Just before dawn, Eli took his boat out, as he always did, though his heart no longer expected a miracle. Mist clung to the surface of the water, turning everything into a dream. Halfway across, he noticed someone standing on the riverbank, a figure cloaked in white, motionless, watching him. Eli frowned. The river was wide. Few dared to walk so far this early. He called out, "Who's there?" The stranger raised a hand in greeting but said nothing. When Eli pulled his boat to shore, the figure smiled, a calm, knowing smile that felt ancient and kind. "Peace to you, old fisherman," the stranger said. "You look burdened." Eli blinked. "And who are you to see my burdens?" The man chuckled softly. "I see what is heavy because I have carried much myself." There was something about his voice, not commanding, but filled with quiet certainty. Eli felt drawn to him. He offered the stranger bread and water, as was custom, and the two sat by the river. After a long silence, the stranger asked, "Why do you still come to the river if you no longer believe it will give you fish?" Eli hesitated. "Because it's all I know." "Then perhaps," said the stranger, "it is time to know something new." The river's lesson. For 3 days, the stranger stayed by Eli's hut. He spoke little of himself, but much of life. One morning, as the sun broke through the clouds, he asked Eli to row him to the middle of the river. When they reached the deepest part, he said, "Throw your net." Eli sighed. "There's nothing here. I've cast this net 1,000 times. Then what harm is there in one more time?" Eli obeyed, if only to humor him. He let the net sink, then began to pull it back, and gasped. The net was heavy, so heavy he thought it might break. Fish, hundreds of them, shimmered and twisted in the morning light, more than he had caught in all the past year. Eli looked at the stranger in awe. "How?" The man smiled. "You were never meant to stop casting, only to stop expecting it your way." The words struck deep. He had spent months cursing the heavens, yet in this moment, he realized the river had never abandoned him. He had simply stopped trusting its rhythm. The storm. But miracles are not always gentle. That night, as the sky turned violent and the winds howled, Eli's hut shook with thunder. The stranger stood outside, unafraid, as rain lashed against his robes. Eli shouted, "Come inside. The storm will drown you." But the man raised his arms to the sky and said something Eli could not hear. Moments later, a flash of lightning struck a nearby tree, splitting it in two. Eli fell to his knees, trembling. "Why are you not afraid?" he cried. The stranger turned to him, eyes glowing faintly in the darkness. "Because storms do not come to destroy. They come to cleanse." He stepped closer, and Eli saw tears in the man's eyes, not of sorrow, but of compassion. "Do you not see?" the stranger whispered. "Every storm you curse is the hand that reshapes your soul. Faith is not believing when the sun shines. Faith is standing still when the heavens roar." And then, as suddenly as it began, the storm ceased. When Eli looked up again, the stranger was gone. The days of silence. For weeks after, Eli searched for him. He asked travelers, priests, merchants, none had seen such a man. But each morning, when he went to the river, he felt a strange peace settle over him, as if unseen eyes still watched with kindness. He rebuilt his hut, repaired his boat, and fished again, not because he expected miracles, but because he trusted the river would give what was needed. And it did, not always in plenty, but always enough. One evening, as he mended his net, a young boy from the village approached. My father says you talk to the river. Is it true? Eli smiled. I talk, yes. And sometimes, if I'm quiet enough, it talks back. What does it say? Eli looked at the horizon, where the sky melted into gold. That God hides in the ordinary, and that when you stop demanding answers, you start hearing them. The pilgrim. Years passed. Eli grew older, his beard turning white as the river's foam. One winter morning, a traveler came to his door, weary, dust-covered, and trembling with cold. Eli took him in, gave him bread and fire, and asked where he was headed. I seek the man who performs miracles, the traveler said. They say he walks the lands, healing the sick and calming storms. Eli's heart stirred. Tell me of him. They say his eyes hold light, that he teaches of faith, forgiveness, and love, that he is the voice of the divine itself. Eli said nothing. He only looked toward the river, glimmering under the winter sun. The traveler followed his gaze. Have you seen such a man? Eli smiled faintly. Once. Long ago. But I think he was not just a man. The traveler pressed him. Where did he go? Eli's eyes softened. Where he always was. Everywhere. The last journey. That night, Eli dreamed of the river. It was wider than before, endless and glowing with light. On the far shore stood the stranger, smiling as he had that first morning. Are you ready? He asked. Eli hesitated. For what? To come home. Eli looked back, at his little hut, his nets, his fire. But who will care for the river? The man's voice echoed gently. The river does not need care. It only needs to be trusted. When Eli awoke, the dawn had barely touched the sky. He felt no fear, no sorrow, only peace. He walked to the river one last time, stepped into the boat, and pushed away from the shore. As he drifted, the sun rose, painting the waters in gold. He closed his eyes and whispered, into your hands, I cast my net one final time. And somewhere, beyond the mist, a voice replied, you were never fishing for fish, Eli. You were fishing for faith. The boat floated gently downstream, empty but full. When the villagers found it later that day, there was nobody, only a folded net and a single white feather resting on the seat. The legend of the river. Years turned to generations, and the story of Eli the fisherman became legend. They said that sometimes, in the soft light of dawn, when the mist rises from the water, a white cloaked figure can be seen standing on the far bank, waiting. And if you listen closely, you might hear his voice whisper across the ripples, cast your net again. Centuries later, in a city far from any river, a young woman named Mira sat at her desk, staring at a rejection email on her computer screen. She had lost her job, her hope, and her sense of purpose. Her apartment was small, her life noisy with failure. She looked out the window at the rain and muttered, why me? Why does nothing work? That night, unable to sleep, she took a walk. The city lights blurred in the puddles, and in the quiet corner of a park, she came upon a small, forgotten fountain. There was an inscription on the stone beside it, faith is casting your net again, even when you think the river is empty. Something stirred inside her. She didn't know where the words came from, or why they felt so familiar. But as she stood there, she felt a strange peace, like invisible hands lifting the weight off her heart. She whispered, all right, one more time. The next morning, she applied again for a position she'd been rejected from months ago. This time, she got it. The Light Beyond the RiverA. Years later, Mira would tell her students about that night, about the inscription, the rain, and the faith to try again. She never learned who wrote those words on the fountain, but sometimes, when the wind moved just right, she thought she could hear the sound of water, soft, eternal, whispering across unseen banks. And in that whisper, she always heard the same voice, faith is not in the result. Faith is in the casting. Epilogue, the river never ends. There will come a time in every life when the river seems empty. When every prayer feels unheard, and every door remains closed. You will be tempted to believe that heaven has forgotten your name. But remember, the river is never still. It moves beneath the surface, carrying unseen blessings toward you. Faith is not waiting for the current to change. It's rowing when you don't see the shore. And sometimes, when you cast your net into what looks like nothing, you'll find not fish, but light.